Kale here from Zero Tolerance Homebrew Club, and I have Jason Yerger from the upcoming Mutantis Brewery and Bottle Shop. And so thank you for joining us, Jason. Appreciate
My
you
pleasure.
stopping by. So in terms of your new operation, can you tell us a little bit about Mutantis, what the mission is, and what you guys are doing there, and when it's going to open? All the details on that.
Absolutely. So Mutantis is kind of my attempt at bringing together all the gluten-free beer that is all over the place down here in Oregon under one roof. I'm not doing a big operation. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of packaging. It's mostly going to be like a brew pub, bottle shop kind of deal. But I plan on carrying all the gluten-free beer that I can basically get my hands on here in the Pacific Northwest, giving dedicated taps to the other Northwest gluten-free breweries. So, anybody who's passing through the area, if you want to come to one spot and try every gluten-free beer you can get in the Northwest, you can come get it at Mutantis. But of course, I'm also going to be brewing a lot of my own beer as well. It would be pretty tough to make it financially successful if I was just selling other people's beer. Plus, I mean, brewing is kind of what I do. So to not have a brewery component would be a little bit silly. But yeah, so it's basically focused around doing a lot of experimentation, a lot of one-off limited release kind of stuff. No flagships. That's kind of my motto. Never brew the same beer twice. Basically just like what I would do as a home brewer, except on a slightly larger scale.
A lot of freedom in the process in terms of, if you're doing small batches, you get to brew whatever you want when you want. How does that how does that free you up from the constraints of like, if you had a flagship series where you just had to focus on pumping out beers, the same beers over and over again?
Yeah, well, they're two very different sides of essentially the same coin, in the brewing industry. It's like on the one hand, you have breweries that are focused on, large scale distribution, consistency, making the same beer as as exact as possible every single time, which is, a skill and an art unto itself. But for me personally, as a brewer, it's not very fulfilling. I like to be able to tinker with stuff. Um, you know, I don't really have a lot of fun if I just get one recipe that's kind of like good enough and just keep rolling that over and over again. Like I always want to be trying out new stuff and like, like I'm not content with just like a pretty good IPA or something like that. I want to really refine the style, like get it as close to perfect as I can. And I feel like there's like unlimited room for improvement, so like to have the freedom to just kind of tweak whatever I want, whenever I want. And, if I get something right, great. If I, face plant on it and it turns out to be crap, oh, well, it's, just one batch and I've got a brand new one right around the corner.
Yeah, you always want to improve the beers, right? And hopefully it goes in that direction instead of the opposite direction, right? So I'm sure it can go both ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to break a few eggs if you want to make an omelet. They're not all going to be like gold medal winners, but
Yeah.
that's the price of admission.
Yeah. So tell me about the name, right? Where I always find it fascinating where the names kind of came from. Is there a story behind the name at all?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the short answer is it's a portmanteau of mutant and Atlantis. And I kind of think of it as being like, you know, a safe place for mutants, because all of us with celiac disease, I mean, mutants. That's what we are. We have some kind of weird mutation with our immune system. And, we kind of got to stick together. We're the minority here. But also, there's kind of a deeper story behind it. So I am a licensed minister in the Church of the Subgenius, which I don't think a lot of people have heard of these days. It was kind of popular in like the late 80s, early 90s, but it's a very interesting joke disguised as a religion, disguised as a joke, kind of just a really like weird, surrealist, postmodern kind of bunch of people who just do a lot of like wild and wacky pranks and stuff like that. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it because it's really kind of difficult to explain. But the Church of the Subgenius has this whole mythology of like the subgenius as being this alternate species that, evolved parallel to humanity. And, we actually were like seeded by like this race of aliens known as the Exists back in like, you know, prehistoric times. There was basically we were like livestock for a race of Yetis that lived in a great city known as Mutantis. And, I just thought that was a really evocative name. And, when I was trying to come up with names for a brewery, I wanted to pick something that really was kind of near and dear to my heart and would kind of, let my freak flag fly, so to speak. And
Yeah, yeah.
out of all the names that I had on the short list, that was the one I kind of kept coming back to. It's an homage to something that's important to me. It's weird, it's short, it's probably going to get misspelled and mispronounced a lot, which I kind of enjoy for some perverse reason. But yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, naming a brewery to me reminds me of my experience of thinking about what tattoo I want to get, right? So,
Yeah,
and I don't have any tattoos, right? And I could never like name my own brewery just because I keep overthinking it, right? It's like you can always, I feel like if you're doing something as important as that, it's like hard not to overthink that
yeah,
whole portion of it, right? For sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like I've I remember back to when I was like really first getting serious about home brewing and starting to like dream about starting my own brewery. I've been thinking about what I would call my own brewery since like
Yeah.
2010, 2011, and it took me a long time to settle on Mutantis.
Nice, nice. It's fine. I bet it's nice to finally see it coming to life. And tell us a little bit about your timeline and how the pandemic has affected that, and when you think you're going to be open for business and have people in the door and be able to get have your dream be fulfilled, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I am trying my best to get open by mid-July. I am an army of one in this project. I don't have any partners or employees or anything like that. So I'm basically, doing everything myself, along with a general contractor. So, it's really all on me if I don't make it by mid-July. But um, I was originally trying to be open in March, which I'm really glad I didn't end up making that happen, because then I would have been open right before the pandemic hit. Um, Basically, what happened is I was all kind of set to like just start, kicking ass and taking names and whatnot. And the city building department decided they wanted to go through a whole seismic review process that just threw a monkey wrench into everything. So everything just kind of went to a grinding halt. And it was only really in the last month or so that I finally cleared the last of those hurdles. So now I'm just like frantically trying to like get the place painted and cleaned up, trying to marshal my fabricator and my contractor to like get on the same page for the system install, which should be happening in the next couple of weeks. It's just a mad scramble at this point. So it's anyone's guess when I'll actually get the doors open, but I keep telling myself mid-July.
And so once you get open, how many taps do you think you're going to have going? And then and it sounds like all of the different gluten-free brewery from the Oregon market are going to be in there for either bottles or cans or maybe even kegs or anything like that. How many different beers on tap you're going to be looking to brew?
So I'm shooting for about 14 taps. I want to have 8 of my own beers, and then plus a tap for Beerly, for Groundbreaker, for Moon Shrimp, for Evasion, and then I'll probably have another tap. They'll kind of rotate through, random people's seasonal offerings.
Yeah.
If somebody else like Cold Crash ever makes it down here, I'll definitely give them a tap. And then I want to have a cider tap just because you got to have a cider tap. And beyond that, I plan on stocking like a nice big reach-in cooler full of everybody's bottles and cans and all that good stuff.
Like there's people that are going to watch this maybe from other parts of the world, and if they see this and they're from another part of the world where they have zero options, right? They're
Yeah,
going to be so jealous about what you're doing at this place because I mean, I can tell you, I'm in Seattle, and it's a pretty, gluten friendly. I hate the term, right? But it's pretty friendly to, gluten free beer drinkers and gluten free people in general, right? But from other areas that I've been into, it's like, oh, I'll take the rosé cider, right?
yeah,
That's all you get. So, I mean, to see what you're doing and what's happening down in the Portland, McMinnville, Oregon market is pretty fantastic. I mean, it's kind of a destination
yeah.
for a beer drinker that has celiac or gluten intolerance or something like that, right? So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's really the reason I wanted to do this in Portland, because like I could have moved to another city where there's no gluten-free beer on the market, and tried to fill that niche. But, I don't really like trying to be all things to all people. And, when you're kind of the first in a new market, that's a whole, headache to like try to get yourself on the shelf and all that. Like here in Portland, the market's pretty well established. So rather than going out and like, trying to get on grocery store shelves and whatnot, I can really just kind of like amp up the momentum that all these other brewers are building up and kind of like help just kind of like tie it all together.
Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to. I know you had posted a picture of the insides, and of course the space looks huge when there's nothing in it, right? But
Yeah.
and you're I'm sure surely planning on filling that up with your equipment and all that kind of stuff. So um, I guess that there's not that many hurdles left, right? So you just got to
Yeah,
get the equipment in there and finish the finishing touches on there, and it's a mad dash at this point, right?
definitely.
Nice. I wanted to switch the topics to brewing processes and things like that, and I think that there's on our Facebook page for Zero Tolerance Gluten Free Home Brew Club, there's a lot of conversation about mashing techniques when it comes to mashing gluten free. It's let's say it's an art form, right? And so
Yeah,
there's reverse step mashes, there's rising step mashes, there's single infusion mashes, there's um, start really hot, go down really low, and then start back up. I've been doing decoction mashes where it's kind of all over the board. What's your opinion in terms of the amount of effort that's involved in some of those mashing techniques when it comes to the ease of the mashing technique versus the wort fermentability, or what you get out of something that's got a lot of more complexity to it?
yeah. I mean, it's a tough question to answer because it really depends on what you're trying to get out of the beer, like how much you care about efficiency, how much you care about body and head retention and whatnot. At this point, you know, the community has kind of found like probably at least a dozen ways to successfully make gluten-free beer out of the variety of grains that are available to us. um, what I'm mostly focused on at this point is just kind of trying to figure out how to have like as complete control as possible over the finished product for like as little effort as possible. Because I mean, realistically, you can get away with just a single infusion mash if you're okay with efficiencies in the like 70 to 80% range. Um, or you can do some like slightly more complicated mashes and just dump a bunch of glucoamylase in there and you'll get great efficiency and huge attenuation, but you might be hurting on the head retention, the body, and whatnot. I'd love to say I've got it all figured out at this point, but honestly, it's still, I think we're still a little ways away from having it like fully dialed in. I mean, I've been working pretty closely with JP Beerley down at Beerley Brewing for like about the last year or so. The two of us have just been kind of working together, trying different enzymes, different mash methods and whatnot, and kind of comparing notes with other brewers. And what's bizarre to me is that stuff that works in one brewery doesn't seem to translate to another, and like vice versa. Like, I see people posting results from some process, and I'll try the same process, and like it'll be like completely different. And it's like, what is going on here? Do we have like gremlins in the malt that are just kind of like messing with us in different ways? But I mean, that's kind of one of the things that I hope to do with Mutantis is, with all these experimental batches, I'm going to have the opportunity to just try like every other idea that I can come up with, and hopefully can finally dial in a mash that works and that you can like really just tweak a few little things and get drastically different results.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I did my first decoction mash on one of my last brews, and it was fun to me as a brewer because it really got me into the process, if you will, right? I was in there stirring the mash and heating it up and, pulling the mash out and doing that whole process was, I mean, to me, that's a little bit more rewarding than just pressing a button and then having a machine just do it for me, right? So at some point I'll probably just be to the point where I just want to press a button.
Yeah.
Right. But it's definitely an art form. And you've also, speaking of Beerly, you guys have both been pretty open and willing to share with a lot of the results that you have with the community of homebrewers, which is awesome to see that, especially in this type of brewing where there's all sorts of, like you said, there's so many different variables that are out there that it's hard to determine, is it my system, is it the enzymes, is it the grains, like why can't I repeat what someone else has done, right? There's
Yeah.
so many variables.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what the community needs more than anything is sort of like a shared knowledge base, like because a lot of like commercial gluten-free brewers like to be really protective about whatever they've come up with. They find something that works for them and they want to treat it like, it's a trade secret or something like that. But I feel like that really kind of stifles growth. It's like you find something that's good enough, but you don't really know if there's something better out there unless you're actively talking to other brewers and kind of comparing notes and sharing processes and stuff like that. So, I've always kind of felt pretty strongly that like I don't want to keep my knowledge closely guarded. I want to get it out there as far and wide as possible so that other people can kind of build off of it, come back to me and say, hey, I tried this and then I changed this and I got this result and I think it was better. Maybe you should try it this way. And so far that's kind of been the case for me, because I will literally tell everything I know to anybody who asks. um, you know I like to charge for it when I can, but honestly, let's be real. Like, buy me a beer and I'll pretty much spill my guts. So
I was gonna say, when I first started brewing gluten-free beer, well, I'd never brewed anything but, right? So I was just new to the hobby in general, but I stumbled upon Homebrew Talk, and it's funny because looking at the gluten-free brewing section in that, I know it's from a long time ago, but there's still threads on there that I think you started, and it's pretty cool to go back and read some of the crazy stuff that was going on. Definitely, you could tell that you were definitely super into it, right? So
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. What I lack in knowledge and training, I usually make up for in enthusiasm.
There's something to be said for enthusiasm and ambition, just leading the way, right? So
Yeah,
it's, if you don't put the effort in, then it doesn't matter how smart or how knowledgeable you are about a subject. It's You got to put that effort in to really take it to the next level.
yeah,
So you mentioned enzymes, right? That's the second in the, one of the pillars of crazy gluten-free brewing mythology, if you will, right? So, I mean, in industrial, the enzymes that are in those grains, it's like we have to basically heat them up so high to get them to gelatinize that we, end up frying out all the natural enzymes in there. So
yeah,
a lot of the times, we've been putting in these industrial type of enzymes to get fermentable wort. and then I think you mentioned it that it's kind of like case by case, what enzymes and which mashing strategies are best for what beer, right?
Yeah.
So, from your perspective, what's your thought on, um, enzymes and gluten-free brewing in general?
Yeah. So there's basically, if you read, basic homebrew book, they always talk about alpha amylase and beta amylase, and that's kind of as far as most people's understanding goes. But really, for us in gluten-free brewing, it's not nearly that simple. Like beta amylase is almost like completely off the table for us, and alpha amylase is not actually as cut and dry as it's kind of talked out to be. Like, they always say, like, conventional wisdom, alpha amylase just kind of randomly chops the starches, and you get some dextrin, some glucose, whatnot. But like, there's actually different types of alpha amylase that favor different types of sugar production, for lack of a better word. Like, some alpha amylases are really dextrin heavy, some of them are really maltose heavy, some of them will even produce more in the range of glucose. Um, so figuring out exactly what kind of alpha amylase you're working with is kind of one of the hard parts, because most people, I mean, even I don't really know half the time, because enzyme companies aren't really keen to tell you what's in their products. um, but so we're, like, that's kind of where I'm at right now, is trying to find specifically a maltogenic alpha amylase, because unless you have a maltogenic amylase, the primary conversion that's going to happen with a glucoamylase, because that's one of the only other types of amylase that'll actually break down amylopectin, which is a type of starch that is found like heavily in rice malt. And amylopectin really doesn't like to break down under most alpha amylases. Um, but glucoamylase will break it down all day long. It'll just make nothing but glucose out of it, and you'll end up with basically like a brute form of whatever beer you're trying to make. But until pretty recently, that's what most of us were using in the commercial gluten-free brewing industry. Because, you know, I remember back in the day when I was getting started at Ghostfish, I kind of was going back and forth with a research chemist at one of the enzyme companies, and it was like, here, try this. And like, oh, okay, this works. I'm getting conversion. I'm getting attenuation. Oh, glucoamylase. All right, great. That's what I'll use. Um, so that was mostly where it was at. Now I'm kind of trying to refine my understanding about alpha amylase, but then there's one more enzyme that's also very important, which is pilolinase, which basically, how can I explain this as succinctly as possible? um, it doesn't make sugar, but it does break starches down into simpler starches that are then more accessible to
Yeah,
alpha amylase.
I kind of see.
So,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I see like the image of like a how to brew where John Palmer's got the branches, and then the branches get cut into a little bit smaller twigs, and
Yeah,
then there's a tree, and then there's the branches, and then there's the twigs. It's kind of a good analogy, I think. So Polonaise is basically kind of taking the branches and making them into smaller twigs, if you will, right?
yeah, you can definitely think of it that way.
Yeah.
And like, different starches have different degrees of branching, and that's the thing, is even like amylopectin is generally considered a branched starch, but how branched it is really depends on the grain. Like, the amylopectin you find in millet might not nearly be as branched as the amylopectin you find in rice malt. And that's one of the reasons why rice malt has been kind of tricky to work with. A millet malt's easy. Like, you can get that stuff to convert with just about any enzyme you want to throw at it, and it'll be fine. But rice malt is always like either it converts completely to sugar, or like you just end up with a bunch of dextrins and it won't attenuate. And honest to God, that's been where I've just been kind of banging my head against the wall for like the last 5 or 6 years. Is like, how do we get rice malt to work as easily as millet malt? And it really, I think we're getting close, but pilolinase was definitely like the missing link in there.
It seems like the new malts from Eckert, the new biscuit rice malts, and then the Ondia Pro that a lot of people have been using. Um, I brewed with that one of the new biscuit rice malts, and the smell when you milled that and then when you brewed with it was just amazing, right? And I had had the worst luck with like an all rice malt beer before, where I basically just said I'm just going to focus on mainly millet based beers. But now it's like I'm starting to see a shift, and I feel like there's a more of a shift in the home brewing community where a lot more people are experimenting with 50-50 or more rice heavy
Yeah,
bills, or rice as a base malt, if you will, right? So it's
totally.
been interesting to see.
That was kind of how we knew that Ondia Pro was really something special. Is, JP and I, we brewed a 100% rice malt lager based off of one of Jim Eckert's recipes, and until that point, every all rice beer I'd made was like astringent, poorly attenuated, had some kind of weird like wintergreen celery seed character. But when we did this all rice malt lager with the Ondia Pro, it came out sweet and clean and full bodied. And I was like, there's no way this is 100% rice malt. Like, what is going on here? This is like a whole new ball game now. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, exactly. And now the thing is, a lot of people are struggling with attenuation, right? They're
right.
getting these great sweet beers, but then it ends up at, 1.020 or something like that, and it's just
Yeah.
not to the style. So um, it's there's there's still some mystery in there a little bit. With, I know even JP had mentioned, hey, there's some of these beers are under attenuating, and uh,
Yeah.
so for some styles that may be perfect, right? But other styles that doesn't really fit what you're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah. And so that's kind of the like, the holy grail right now is like we're trying to figure out what the right enzyme is to add to the Ondia Pro. It'll get our attenuation to like the mid 70s. We don't want to go too far, just strip the body out of everything, but like being able to get above like 60 to 63% attenuation would definitely open up a lot more doors.
What we need is we need I know there's some literature out there. The Facebook page, our Facebook page, is a little bit tough because there's a lot of good information in there, but it kind of disappears over time. But at some point there's got to be like the how to brew gluten-free edition, if you will, that
Yeah,
someone's going to create. And I think that a lot of the work that people are doing now is going to lead to being able to have that as a resource for homebrewers and even pro brewers in the future.
definitely. I mean, I keep threatening to write a book like that, but right now I don't exactly have an abundance of free time to start working on a manuscript. But if somebody else doesn't beat me to the punch, it's definitely on my like bucket list. But if nothing else, like if somebody else is taking the lead on it, I definitely want to like help out however I can, because that book needs to exist. But we have to kind of figure out the best practice first. We still have a little ways to go before it's like ready for prime time.
Yeah, well, you hear that? That's a challenge. I think that's a challenge out there from Jason Yerger from Mutantis. That if no one else gets on it, he's going to write a book, right? Once you get a little bit of spare time, right? It sounds like you're not going to have any spare time for the most part for a long period of time, right?
At least probably the next year or two, I think. With any luck, I'll be successful enough that I can actually hire some help after a little while. But we'll see. With the climate the way it is now, the whole COVID everything, it could be a tough first couple of years. If we get hit with some more lockdowns, if we hit a second wave of the pandemic, who knows? I'm just
Yeah,
fingers crossed that we keep it under control and don't have to shut down again once we reopen.
exactly. So let everyone know, how can they get more information about Mutantis. Again, you're looking to most likely open in the middle of July, hopefully. Are you on Facebook? Where can people get more information about the operation?
Yeah, so I do have a Facebook page. If you just search Mutantis, which for those listening at home, if you can't think of how to spell it, just spell mutants and then add an I before that S at the end, and that's Mutantis. There's also, I've got a website that I just finished a rebranding on. It's just mutantis.beer, which who knew the dot beer was a thing, right? But as soon as I saw that was an option, I'm like, yeah, mutantis.beer. That's what I want. But you can check that out. I don't update that as frequently as I do the Facebook page, but I'm going to get better about that as I actually start getting closer to opening. I don't have any other social media right now. I'd love to get an Instagram going. Probably not going to bother with Twitter because that's kind of a whole mess. But it's just there's so many things to juggle right now that I'm just kind of trying to focus on like Facebook and the website. But
And if you ever want, from a home brewing side, if you ever want Jason's opinion, then if you join the Zero Tolerance Facebook page, he's a frequent commenter and helps out a lot with people that need assistance or have questions about gluten-free brewing. So we appreciate you for that. So it sounds like you got mutant beer for mutant people, right? We need to come up with a new slogan for your place, man. Well, I want to thank you for joining. This is the first of, I hope, several of these kind of Meet the Brewer programs for the Zero Tolerance page and for YouTube. So thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for stopping by, and happy brewing.
thanks,
Cheers.
Kale. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure.